Okay, hello again. For this video, I want to talk about the reading that I posted on Moodle called the Black Arts Movement. So I guess I'll say to go and do that reading, or at least the first 5 pages I think I asked for. So before watching the rest of this video, I would do that reading and also answer the questions that I've given you about it. I generally think it's better for you guys to try this stuff out by yourself first, and then, you can kind of get my clarifications and thoughts on it once you've done that. So I would go and do all of that first, and now that you have done that, I'll get into talking about it a little bit. So, first of all, I just think this essay is very helpful for thinking about the poems that we're looking at. I think it has a lot of information that could be useful for really any essay that you're going to be writing about, especially if you're writing about, if you're writing about It's Nation Time or Mississippi Goddamn, especially, because I think those are the more kind of black nationalist sort of poems that we looked at that fit in more with this kind of black arts idea. Okay, so let's get into this. A few things. So the first kind of section title I have here, it says From Reform to Revolution. And I think reform and revolution, I think those are kind of good stand-ins for the way we've been talking about the kind of, nonviolent Christian MLK side of the movement that's more focused on negotiation, and the black nationalist side more focused on, self-direction and yeah, taking direct control of things and really seizing power in different ways. Um, so I think we can kind of see in reform and revolution, we can kind of relate that to like negotiation versus like taking power. So I think it's a good way of thinking about it, first of all. So a lot of the way that the first like few paragraphs after it says from reform to revolution in this first section, um, it's kind of setting off that like the black arts movement, black nationalism, was kind of like a response to the civil rights laws being passed, the Civil Rights Law of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Like it says on page 51, it says that the kind of language around this time indicates the rising sentiment that the promise of civil rights had still not been realized after the landmark 1964 Act. It goes on to say that the Black Arts period can be understood as developing as a response to the civil rights predicament. So basically, the article's trying to say that like once these like landmark laws got passed, and that were supposed to be like the real successes of the civil rights movement, that people kind of looked at that and didn't see changes in their real lives or saw like how ineffective those laws were and kind of got disillusioned or something and then became more radical because of it. I don't think this is totally right, this kind of framing of it, the kind of uh, timing of everything from some of the stuff that I was reading and some of the stuff I sent you guys in that last email I sent. Um, those articles kind of suggest that black nationalism and black power as an ideology really goes back like at least to the 50s. And you can trace the roots of it even further than that. But Malcolm X was active in the 50s. It's not like he was saying the same thing as MLK in the 50s. He wasn't. He was still much more radical. So I would quibble a little bit maybe with the way they described like the timing of all of this. Um, but yeah, whatever. I still think it works to think about the kind of these poems as being more interested in revolution than reform. I think that point still holds, even if it's not only be even if it started happening before the Civil Rights Act and stuff were passed. Okay, so there's also some quotes here from one of our poets, right, which I think could help us. Um, in here, they refer to him as Leroy Jones. This is Amiri Baraka, is the same person as Leroy Jones. His name was Leroy Jones, and then he changed it to Amiri Baraka. Um, so I just want to read some of the quotes that they have from in here. It says that this is an article that Baraka wrote in 1964 entitled "What Does Nonviolence Mean?" That would maybe be a good piece of research, especially if you're writing about its nation time, to go look up that article and see what he says in there and see if it connects to his poem at all. And I think it will, because some of the quotes he gives here, it says, quote, in order for the Negro to achieve what I will call an equality of means, that is, at birth to be able to benefit by everything of value in society, of course the society would have to change almost completely. So again, that focus on revolution, complete system overhaul, society would have to change almost completely, he says. The author of this article goes on, his point is that actual social equality would require a restructuring of the US social realm, which goes beyond the ostensibly symbolic changes promised by further civil rights legislation. So yeah, I think among the more radical thinkers of the time, I think even in the moment, I think even as these laws were being passed, I think they were like, well, this is not going to be enough. This is not really going to work. Because passing laws and then what actually happens on the ground, like it's not always so easy to change what happens in people's day-to-day life just by passing a law. Like, I remember like at various times over the past year when it's like, oh, Congress just passed a law to give people more unemployment. And it's like, oh wow, the law's passed, that's great. And then it's like, oh, but it's going to take, 2 months for them to figure out how to get you the money actually. So it's just like that divide between like, we can have a law in the books that says like there's no more employment discrimination or something, but actually changing that on the ground is a totally different matter. Um, so I think we see here Baraka, even in 1964, being like, well, if we were really going to change this stuff, society would have to be like completely overhauled, you know? A restructuring of the U.S. social realm. I don't know why this author keeps using the term social realm. It's kind of a strange phrase. I think that maybe they're trying to sound smart. But I feel like by saying social, they're kind of excluding economic, which I think all of our poets and the people we're reading were really concerned with the economic aspects of it, and a lot of them combine their radical kind of beliefs as regards race. It was combined with a kind of radical economic positions, calling for more programs to help poor people, sometimes calling for socialism, uh, for a full kind of reordering of economic sphere as well as the social sphere. Okay, just going on. I just want to. Okay, so yeah, so here's another quote from Baraka. He says, "The point is, I think that the poor black realizes, at least instinctively, that no matter what deal goes down in terms of civil rights legislation, or no matter whose side wins, the crackers or the government, no help at all is being offered to him." Yeah. So again, just going further with that the sense is for the more radical thinkers of the time that whatever civil rights battles being fought, that ultimately as Baraka says, the poor black, the um, people who are suffering the most, the people at the lowest end of society, even if you pass this law, it's not going to reach them. It's not actually going to help them. Um, and that, yeah, a much greater overhaul of the system essentially would have to be done to change that. And I think that's why, again, they focus so much on this idea of self-direction, of like kind of seizing power locally at least, even if it wasn't always about creating a new country, it would be about, well, we need to find a way to take over the mayor or like the local government of this city just to improve people's lives in a material way. And the black nationalists, even the more radical side, they were also very involved in local protests that we normally associate more with Martin Luther King, um, and like community organizing programs. Like there's the Black Panthers had a famous program of like providing free breakfast to people. Largely to like children and families and stuff, but providing those like direct kind of social services that would make people's lives better. Um, and yeah, again, trying to take power locally in that kind of way. So yeah, some really good quotes there from one of our authors, which I think could be very, very relevant if you're writing about one of his poems. Okay, here's another quote that I think is relevant, especially stuff we've been talking about. This is a quote from another writer, Anita Cornwell. It says, "Voting rights bill or no, many suns will set before the majority of all eligible Negroes are registered and voting in the South. And long before that comes to pass, they will have heard what the Northern Negro has always known: voting won't get you in there either. we shall overcome is merely a dream. So I wanted to make sure that I touched on that since we listened to We Shall Overcome. So I do think I was right to use We Shall Overcome as the more reform-minded, more peaceful. It's an artistic expression of the politics of the more peaceful protest side of the movement. And so yeah, here we have one of the more radical thinkers saying we shall overcome is merely a dream. So not only are they criticizing we shall overcome as being, kind of bullshit, I guess, but also saying it's a dream, which that's that other word that we started out this unit on poetry talking a lot about, right? The dream deferred, dream makes a giddy sound. Here, we shall overcome is merely a dream. So yeah, it's looking at that the kind of the idea that if we just peacefully protest, if we do sit-ins, if we turn the other cheek, our victory is inevitable. And these people are saying like no, they're just going to give you these empty symbols. They'll pass a civil rights act that doesn't actually help anyone get a job. They'll pass a voting rights act that doesn't actually help anyone vote. And you know what? Even if you can vote, that's not going to be enough anyway. So again, this was this more radical side. So what I hope we can try to do with our essays is show how the poems contain these political messages, right? Um, and I think some of the ones that we read, I think definitely do. Other ones might have a different political message. But this is all stuff that we can be thinking about. Okay, so another major point that I wanted to get to here had to do with form, with the form of poetry. Okay, so now I'm looking at page 52. And they talk here between, quote, the linkage of the analysis of African American civic situation to calls for new aesthetic practices. So there's an argument in this chapter that the kind of rejection of the, like traditional means of protest and stuff, and turning the other cheek and things like that, that the rejection of that more conventional side of the civil rights movement coincided with the rejection of conventional artistic forms. So going on here, they quote someone. They say Larry Neal's insistence on a radical reordering of the aesthetic. Of aesthetics describes an artistic strategy meant to parallel a radical reordering of the social realm beyond the reach of recent civil rights legislation. Um, so yeah, basically they're saying if you want a radical reordering of society, if you want revolution in society, that needs to have a revolutionary aesthetics. It needs to have a revolutionary form. So I think this to me really sticks out for something like It's Nation Time. How just like non-traditional and unconventional the form of both the poem and the song are. I think the argument here would be that it had to be like the form of it had to be so radical because the political message is radical. That if you were gonna reject the way that like the traditional political positions that you needed to also reject traditional forms of poetry and forms of music and stuff like that. And then it says at the end here on page 52, the inadequacies of the U.S. civil rights situation for Black Americans became the basis for imagining new aesthetic possibilities. So I think that's just a really interesting point, connecting like the form that the poems or the songs take to the political message. And again, if you want a radical political message, you need a radical form for the poem that contains that message. So that's another thing that I think can help us. So again, if you're writing about It's Nation Time or Mississippi Goddamn, especially, maybe even Harlem in a way, maybe all of the poems, honestly. But I would definitely try to see if there's a way you can relate it to this essay and its ideas about like the differences between reform and revolution and how that showed up in poems. Um, the quotes from Baraka, if you're writing about him, and this idea of connecting the form of the poem to the political message that it has. Like, We Shall Overcome has a very traditional kind of form, right? We talked about how it sounds. It's a choir. It sounds more like a hymn or something. It has like a verse, chorus, verse kind of setup. It's a more traditional form, and it has a more traditional political message. Um, so yeah, just another example of how that kind of works. All right. So again, I hope you're reading this essay with an eye towards how you could use it for your own essay, because that was kind of the point of this. All right, that's all for now. See you soon.